Ninjago has had a multitude of theories over the course of its life cycle. Depending on what we know at the time, people do carve their own interpretations of what could happen within the past or within the future of the show. And my channel is focused a lot on Ninjago theory-based content because I absolutely adore it and I like to see where people's heads go to when they do observe the exact same things as I do. You may come to a completely different consensus based purely on the exact same episodes that we do watch, and I think that is absolutely fascinating. But like I said, over the course of time, Ninjago theories have certainly evolved. Some of them have been proven, some of them have been disproven, and I do think that is fairly interesting to see. But I like to look back. I like to look back at these old theories and see if they actually had any basis. Were they completely off? Were they ended up actually being correct? We never actually know the true scope, and I do think that is fun. I have done a video on this topic before as well. If you haven't checked it out, I would do so. But in today's video, we're going to go over 5 more old Ninjago theories, and just see if people were correct regarding it. Some of them are quite funny in retrospect, but also some of them definitely did have some basis. So sit back, relax, and let's talk about some old Ninjago theories. The first theory I want to talk about is actually one that does come from Dragon's Rising. It's quite recent in terms of what I'm talking about in this video, but it's something that I did want to bring up, and that was the theory that Eagles was originally actually going to be Wu. This theory suggested that the dragon that we were seeing within the sets and also within the second season of Dragon's Rising was actually a new version of Wu. It was an evolved state of him, almost in similar vein to what we actually got with Garmadon. Where Garmadon leaned more into the Oni side and took more of an Oni appearance, Wu went the opposite way, adopted more of a dragon-like appearance, and that is where he went after the event of the merge. This stemmed from the Ninjago set itself actually leaking. When the set itself leaked, people saw the resemblances between Eagles and Wu himself, as similar in terms of colours, the hat, the mustache, all of those fairly defining features that we are used to when it does come to Wu, and people decided to pin the pieces together, and decided that that is where Wu has been this entire time. This was also backed up by the fact that a Master Wu minifigure was coming in the Dragon Shrine set, a new version of him at that, a brand new design, a new incarnation, and people thought we were going to see a backstory of Wu in this outfit where he then does become the dragon. And a lot of people did believe this, including me. It made sense and the pieces were definitely adding up, but of course in the end they were separate characters. Which I can't lie is honestly a bit of a shame. I do kind of like the idea of Wu actually taking on more of a dragon-like appearance. I know obviously it would have called a lot into question and definitely would have messed a lot with Ninjago's status quo, but I do think it would have been really interesting conceptually. In similar vein to how Garmadon can become more Oni-like, what if Wu actually had the ability to become a dragon himself? I do think this would have been a very fun concept and definitely would have leaned into a lot of what we know in terms of Dragon's Rising. This is going into a complete what-if scenario, but the thing is that imagine, like with the ninja in Season 4 apparently learning new dragon forms, a Wu that became a dragon could have actually been a very interesting part of that. It would have made for a very interesting concept, and I do think a lot of people would have found that interesting. But of course, like I said, in the end, they are separate. Eagles has now gone on to do his own thing, and is now officially no longer in the show, and Wu's plot is still ongoing. We still know very little about Wu, and ultimately, it's just going to be something that will unfold within the future. I'm still very excited to see what happens with Wu, but this definitely would have been a cool option regardless. But that was the first theory, and unfortunately it was wrong, but I definitely did like it. The second one is a fairly infamous one at that, and I think a lot of people will know exactly where I'm going as soon as I say this. And it was the theory that Lloyd was actually Wu's son instead of Garmadon's. There's only a few things that actually support this theory, and all of them are completely loose at best. For one, a younger version of Wu actually does have blonde hair in similar vein to Lloyd. The other thing is obviously that Wu and Masako have had a very personal relationship throughout the course of their lives. It's very clear that they did have some form of dynamic, and people think that translated to Wu actually having the son of Garmadon. Which I think inherently is just extremely funny because that's such a weird thing that they could have introduced into Ninjago, which is a kid's show at the end of the day. I do understand why people assumed it, and those small details are something that I personally would have picked up on, but I think it's just a bit too far-fetched. I never really believed this theory, I never really took much stock in it, and I feel like it's something that if it was the case it would have been acknowledged by now. But I think it's just something that simply just would never have happened. I could never have seen them going down this route, but a lot of people were definitely convinced of this one. I think it's just honestly a funny theory. I don't think there's anything truly by it, but I think it's just a really funny bit of coincidence that just spiraled into a larger theory. But on overall, like I said, I just never really cared for this one, and I understand why people did, but again, it was just not for me. I just couldn't have gotten behind something like that. It's Ninjago at the end of the day. The third theory is one that actually still kind of continues on to this very day, and that is actually one being that Ninjago and Chima are actually going to have a full-fledged crossover. This originated, just generally speaking, within the first few seasons. When Chima was airing at the same time as Ninjago, a lot of people assumed that they would cross over at some point down the line. But then Possession happened, and we outright saw Lloyd and Morrow go to the realm of Chima, and we actually saw them have a very, very brief interaction with the characters themselves. But ultimately, it didn't really amount to anything, and it was the last thing that we had for a very long time. But people have been convinced that there will be some form of crossover and we will see something happen with the characters. And it has gone no more potent than within Dragon's Rising, because certain Chima references have been made. For example, the Forever Rock has been referenced. And also, just generally speaking, the wildness is wildly be considered to be Chima itself, just under a different tag. And a lot of people are definitely sure that we're going to see some Chima characters at some point down the line. Personally speaking, I just never really took much stock in this theory. I never really cared because, I'm going to be honest, I've never actually watched Chima. I could tell you vaguely about it, but that is kind of it. It's never really been a show that I took interest in, but I understand why the Chima fans were hoping that we were going to get some form of crossover. It would have been cool, and of course Ninjago in recent time has become more in tune with doing crossover content, but the thing is that it just seems to be something that they're not really willing to look into, especially considering that the Chima theme has been gone for a very long time. But again, I'm understanding where this theory came from because there are crumbs and there are references and there are things that would suggest it would happen. But personally speaking, I just don't think they're going to bank in on it. I think if this was about 10 years ago, they may have, but I think as it stands, it's just going to be something that they won't touch on. I think they'll continue to reference Chima, but I think that is basically it. I think honestly, it would just take too much to actually get Chima in terms of Ninjago. And honestly, that is a bit of a shame. But like I said, it just doesn't really affect me because I'm not a Chima fan. But that was a theory that a lot of people believed and still believe to this very day. The fourth theory I want to talk about is actually going to be coming from Doubloon from Skybound. Of course, he is a user of Spinjitzu, which is a very rare thing to see outside of the ninja team itself. There are only few people that actually know this martial art, but he seems to be one of them, and people have been theorizing as to where he actually got this technique from. All we know officially speaking is that he did figure it out at some point down the line. We know that he got it as well before he became a sky pirate, but that is basically it. But the thing about Spinjitzu is that it takes a long time to harness, and it also is something that needs to be taught. Someone needs to figure out how to do it, and it's not really something that you can just pick up casually. The closest anyone has ever actually gotten to learning Spinjitzu without the assistance of someone is actually Aaron. He was able to figure it out, but he wasn't actually able to create a full tornado without the ninja, or more specifically Raz's assistance. So how is it that Doubloon was actually able to figure it out? Well, the theory actually goes, and especially in context of season 11, that either Wu Garmadon or the first Spinjitzu master actually did teach him. Now, of course, I don't think it's the first Spinjitzu master, it's definitely beyond the point of him, but I do think it's interesting that a lot of people believe that it seems to be that Wu or Garmadon actually did teach it, and they're the ones that actually tried to orchestrate maybe some form of new student, some form of new person that would actually be able to become a ninja, but unfortunately, it never came to be and he did part ways. But taking into account that Wu taught Asphira how to use Spinjitzu, a lot of people assume, just simply put, that maybe Doubloon also had that treatment, and maybe Garmadon is the one that actually taught him. We don't actually know for certain, but it seems to be that a lot of people actually believe that that is how he actually figured it out. In terms of an answer, we will most definitely never find out because Doubloon is very much gone in terms of Ninjago space. He's not really relevant to the show anymore, so I doubt they would go back and give an answer to something like that. But I do think it's fairly interesting to note that it seems to be that a lot of people do believe that it was one of the Spinjitzu brothers that actually did teach him. But honestly, it does make a lot of sense. Because self-taught Spinjitzu is simply not a case of happening, and if someone was to do it, it would have to be one of them at that point in the timeline. So I do think it honestly has got some validity to it, and to an extent, I do think it would make for a very fun concept. You could re-explore the concept of when Wu and Garmadon were younger, they made some very bad decisions, and that definitely could have been one of them. But I do think as it stands, this is a theory that we'll never get the answer to, but to an extent, I'm kind of headcanoning that it was actually Garmadon. What's my evidence for that? Not really anything. It's just funny because Wu did it and so did Garmadon by an extent, really maintaining the balance. But like I said, that is the fourth theory, and I actually do like it. But let's move on to the final one, and definitely one of the most infamous ones at that. And that is, of course, and a lot of people were wondering why I never mentioned it the first time, and that was the theory that Kai was actually going to be the Green Ninja. A lot of people are very much sure that it should have been him, even to this very day. This simply just came down to the fact that Kai was the main character at this point in time. Lloyd wasn't really a factor, and when the first season of the show was being advertised, we saw this brand new ninja that at least had eyebrows that were at least a little bit similar to Kai. So a lot of people just assumed that he was going to take on the next mantle. He was going to be the one that took down Garmadon, and we were going to continue with him as the main character. But of course this ended up being incorrect and it was ultimately Lloyd, and I think a lot of people were truly upset about this. A lot of people did want Kai to become that mantle. I do think nowadays it's a very small amount of people who still believe it, but there are definitely people who still note that it should have been Kai. Personally speaking, I'm very much glad it's Lloyd. I like the fact that we still have the four and we still get them to be their own characters as they started out in the show, and Lloyd got to go on to be something else. I think it's the perfect fit and I really don't have any problems with it. But I understand why people were convinced it's Kai, and obviously it did make sense because Lloyd wasn't really a factor at that point, and Kai was very much the focus of the pilots. So it makes sense, I'm not mad at it, but I do think it's one of those theories that we can now comfortably put to rest, 14 years on. But that was the last theory, and I do want to say that on an overall, old Ninjago theories are just something that I find really interesting. It's cool that we can give some answers to some of these questions that we really did wonder about, and I do think it's a fairly fun topic at that. And that is why I want to now pass it off to you guys. Do you wish any of these theories were true? Do you wish any of these theories came to be? And if you could get an answer to one of them, which would it be? I'd be very curious to know what you guys do think about it, because I do think it is a fairly interesting topic. But like I said, on an overall, Ninjago theories are very fun whether they're new or old, and leave in the comment section down below your new or your old theories when it does come to the show. I love reading through them and I do find them very interesting. And if you do want another video where I talk about old theories, please let me know because I do find it very interesting. But that is about it for today, you guys, and thank you very much for watching. And if you did enjoy the video, please consider subscribing. I love talking about Ninjago with more people. And if you do want to support the channel any further, which you do not have to, you could become a channel member and join the legends on screen. Thank you to each and every single one of you. Your support means the world to me. But like I said, that is about it for today, and take care. Okay,